Round one of the NBA playoffs. They've been exciting, and I know a lot of people have been harping on the fact that the ratings are up, and in a lot of places, fans are coming back, which will be another discussion we'll have a little later on in this episode, a tease, if you will. So yeah, we are going to break down round one of what we have so far in the NBA playoffs for the East. We'll start with the East after our little intro here. And then we'll jump into the West because personally, I feel like the West has been more interesting and closer, and so that'll be a better talk in my opinion. But we do want to start with some warm up stuff. I think the first one we want to bring up is Jordan Clarkson winning Sixth Man of the Year. I thought it was awesome the way they did it. A little surprise on the video for the TNT halftime show. I think I like his reaction. Like I think he wasn't fully sure if it was actually happening. You know.
Well, yeah, because it was so well done for anybody who didn't see the video. Like he was there with Joe Ingles, who also was nominated for the award. Him and Derrick Rose were the other two finalists, and I think Ernie asked the question. How many Six Men of the Year have the Utah Jazz had in history? And the answer was zero at the
Yeah.
time. And so Jordan put up zero, and Joe Ingles put up one, knowing that obviously Jordan Clarkson had won the award. He was in the Jordan Clarkson shirt, which was super cool, and
Yeah.
he gave him the trophy. So yeah, it was real live reaction.
How weird would it have been if it's like how weird would it have been if actually Ingle won? So that it's like he's like jumping in his face.
He just punked him the whole time. It's like we're giving him the Matumbo finger wag.
No, no, no. I get the award. No, seriously, I think obviously Clarkson deserving of Sixth Man of the Year. All the sixth man for essentially the best team in the NBA this year. So in all seriousness, I don't disagree with it.
No, yeah, Jordan Clarkson's been excellent all season. But he just plays that role like the Jazz we talk about all the time. Like they brought him in to be that, just bring him in the game, get a bucket off the bench. Like whenever you need a bucket, a pinch,
Mhm.
Jordan Clarkson could. I mean, we know we always in the past make an NBA Twitter loves making the "It's Jordan Clarkson time," Jordan Clarkson memes, and he always is that gunner type of player. But that's exactly what this Jazz team needs, and more importantly, he's done it efficiently this year. Like he's got career highs in points, averaging 18 a game right now. But really, it's been the field goal percentage, or the effective field goal percentage. Still pretty high in the 52s. It slumped a little bit towards the end of the year, and I think that's where a little bit of argument came in. I mean, you even had some Jazz fans who were arguing that Joe Ingles is the real sixth man on that team, and I do think it's a little weird when the NBA always like nominates two players on the same team. Like it was the same deal when they nominated Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell. Well, it's like, so which one's the sixth man?
Well,
Like,
yeah, it's because like I mean, honestly, from like there's a few ways you could take it, but from like the dumbed down as much as possible standpoint, it'd be like, well, you can't have two six man. Someone's got to be the quote unquote seventh man at that point, right?
yeah, absolutely. And so I think that that's always a little weird and kind of looked at when the NBA does that. But nothing again against the campaigns that Joe Ingles and Jordan Clarkson had. But yeah, no, this is a good decision overall. I think I'm pretty satisfied with here. I mean, Derrick Rose made a push late. I will say that, because Derrick Rose essentially. I mean, we'll get into the Knicks Hawks series in a little bit, but one of the things with the Knicks is like Thibodeau just has this weird fascination with Elfrid Payton starting every single game. Your boy Elfrid Payton, and he plays like 6 to 8 minutes. Knicks fans absolutely hate it. He generally is a negative on the basketball court, and they bring in Derrick Rose, who. But it's also weird because like. He's been so, especially in the playoffs early on, like he's been
Yeah.
so crucial for this team. And
Well,
down the
and
stretch, he's their go-to guy.
yeah.
I mean, he's essentially a pseudo starter at that point. And so I definitely think he gave a push at the end. But again, I mean, I think Clarkson did it again for the entire season. And just being on the best team helps again as well. He's known specifically for that role.
Yes, and I think the other part of it is, with Derrick Rose is, like you said, we'll talk about the series a little bit more, but it's like the Knicks don't necessarily have that go-to scorer. And in a way, Derrick Rose kind of fills that at times. And so I think that helps him out as well. But back to the Jordan Clarkson thing, yes, I think it's awesome for him, and I don't take anything away from him. And obviously, in the 3 games for the playoffs so far, playing about 25 minutes and averaging about 15 points, so a good spark, that you need off that bench when people are resting. He can still come out and drop some points on you, and doing it at a decent clip. The 3-point percentage, though, in the playoffs needs needs to step up a tad. He's only actually shooting 14% from three, 1 for 7, I guess, total. Just 3 games though, so it's a smaller sample size, obviously, for the playoffs. But even so, he seems to be filling that 6-man role for the guys as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, he plays the role to a team that they brought him in here for. The other award that we want to talk about, that is the only other one that's been given out at this point, is Julius Randle winning the Most Improved Player.
Hmm.
Again, another really adorable presentation. The Knicks brought his son in. His son brought the award to practice when the whole team was out there, and so they got to celebrate. He's in the little Randall jersey. It was really adorable, but
Hmm.
I mean, I don't think there was anyone on earth who thought that Julius Randle wasn't going to win this award. I mean, obviously, just given the role and the success that the Knicks have had this year, but I mean, just drastic career highs and everything. I mean, his points are at a career high. His effective field goal percentage is at a career high. The 3-point percentage is really the key to all this happening. I mean, his attempts have been slightly ticking up for the past few years. I mean, even last year in New York, and going back to his year in New Orleans, where he went from taking less than 1 a game to taking almost 3 a game in New Orleans, almost 4 last year. He's up to 5.5 attempts this year, but the
Yeah.
percentage increase is just insane. I mean, he went from at best a 34% shooter, and that was the season in New Orleans, where beyond the arc, where he's all the way up to 41% this year. Like, that's a drastic increase. Like we said, a massive part of the team's. I mean, there's an argument. Obviously, I don't think he was ever going to be in the top 3 or anything like that. But you could put Julius Randle in the most valuable player category, like, let alone most improved player. So I do think this was a home run. It was an easy decision.
Well,
And
and to that, like, I mean, just essentially played every single. I think he was inactive for 1 game this season. 1 game, like, just
yeah,
even being healthy enough to play a full season like that and taking literally no days off except for 1, I think that's huge and a big part of how you can, kinda reemerge yourself. But like you were saying, even just looking at the last, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games of the season, and that game against the Clippers, which was the last one that would have been, or the last one of that 5 counting back, would have been on the 9th of May, was not a great game for him. But in those last 5 games leading into the playoffs, which were important games for them to, essentially stay in their spot for the playoffs, stay in that 4th seed, he was playing 42 minutes a game. He was averaging almost 25 points per game, almost 8 assists a game, almost 10 rebounds a game. Like, that is huge numbers. That if you were to tell me that is, Julius Randle's numbers for any span of game, I kind of would have been surprised.
no,
Uh, the
I
season.
joke all the time, like I've said on the show, I had no idea that, like, Julius Randle has always been a good NBA player to me. I had no idea he had this type of improvement in his
Yeah.
bag. And so again, hats off to him. Like we said, been the leader on the Knicks team this year. So one of the most fun seasons they have in a while. Like you said, to your point as well, but, playing meaningful games all the way up until the last game of the season. That 4, 5, 6 was in play. Getting that Atlanta matchup, which we'll talk about a little bit going on. And of course, shout out to the other finalists as well. This is a good. I mean, Julius Randle,
Mhm.
we thought was going to win this award, but this is a good, like, 3 between Jeremy Grant in Detroit, and then Michael Porter Jr. as well. I mean, obviously, Michael Porter Jr.'s lead came after the Jamal Murray injury, unfortunately, but given his increased role, he's been excellent. And Detroit gave a lot of money to Jeremy Grant over the summer. I think that was something that opened a lot of eyes. Grant, obviously excellent in Denver, but never really asked to be that primary role guy. He did it pretty well in Detroit this year. I mean, he was super duper impressive there. So,
Yeah,
um, you know,
I get that not necessarily team performance should factor how a player's, most improved could go, but it's like it's hard when you're on Detroit, you know?
I just I just appreciate the sheer savagery of the Pistons. But I understand. No, I understand. The Pistons
Right.
stink this year.
Right, so
Um,
it's like, cool, you improved, but, like, a big part in my mind of yourself improving is also team success, right? Like,
I mean, are we faulting Jeremy Grant
no,
for Detroit being bad? Like, Jeremy
no.
Grant tried his best. It's not. I mean, look at the rest of that roster.
I know, and that's why I'm like, I don't wanna hate on him for it, but, like, it's hard for me, like, it's the same as giving, like, MVP, which I know it's totally different, but it's like giving MVP to a player who's on the 8th seed in the East or something. Like it's like cool, you were the most valuable, but like your team didn't benefit from that in any way, really. Like
Yeah.
you're the 8th seed in that scenario where it's like same with Jeremy. Like he played great. He had such a great season and the numbers, like you were saying, averaging for the career 10 points per game. This year he's got 22 points per game and the field goal percentages are up. The effective is down a little bit, but you'd imagine when he's taking a bigger shot selection, something like that would happen. But, it's just like your team only won so many games, so you might have improved, but that's not improving to wins. And again, like you were mentioning towards the end of the season, a lot of inactives, and that's probably because they weren't trying to win anyway. So there's parts of that in there, but it's just like, it would have been hard for me to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I don't totally agree because I think again, when it's a drastic, 11 point a game
Sure.
type improvement. Again, I know the role increases, but again, there's only so much certain players like. Not everybody's LeBron, where you can just kind of stick
Right.
them on any team and they're just going to drastically improve. Like I don't think Jeremy Grant was the reason that Detroit had their struggles this year. And so I mean, again, I understand it, and I think that's because that's why we boost Randall, and that's why we've really lauded Michael Porter this year.
Right.
Is that given not just increased roles, but they given the fact that their teams have been successful. Obviously, Denver's still in the mix in the playoffs right now. The Knicks still in the playoffs, hosting a home playoff series in a really good Eastern Conference. I
Hmm.
do think that factors in, but I don't necessarily want to just say that I'm going to discount Jeremy Grant's drastic improvement because of the rest of his team wasn't that good. Like it is an individual award. With MVP,
Yeah.
I agree 100%. Like it matters more. Like if you have insane counting stats and you're on a team that's not in the playoffs, like yeah, I guess you're the most valuable player because what would your team like if you took off it? But I mean, you got to factor in winning a little bit. That's
Right.
always been part of the narrative with MVP. And I mean, look at the top three candidates this year all had winning teams. I mean, even if you drag a team, with Steph Curry, you could say, oh, well, he was an 8 seed, but he was clearly the best player on that team, putting up crazy numbers, and he was dragging them there at one point. Like, obviously, they
Right.
didn't finish the job in the play in, but just to put them in that position and have them with that record at the end of the season, like, I do think that's to be
Yeah.
lauded. But I also think that's the big reason why we're also going with Jokic and Embiid over it, is they have the stats and they both have the wins. So,
And I would say to that, that's why I would be, there's a lot of people saying Curry deserves MVP, and I get the argument, but if you were to give it to Curry over Jokic or Embiid in this scenario, I would just be like, what then where do we like it's how we define value. And I feel like we come back to that every year, but it's like that's not how I view it. Like I can't give it to somebody whose team wasn't one of the best and I know it's not a playoff award. I think the playoffs probably should be a little bit of a factor in my opinion. Like that could be a whole nother conversation. But like I think it should matter once you get into the playoffs and see where it goes and stuff like that. And technically this year, the Warriors didn't.
yeah. Well, and it's a best. Like, it's not a best player award, put it
Right,
that way. Like, it's who had the best body of work, who had the best season. Like, if you're asking me if I'm starting a team right now for one season and I have
right.
one game, who do I want out of Steph, Jokic, and Joel? I'm going to take Steph every time. Like, I think Steph is at worst probably what? The third or fourth best player in the league at this point. Like, you could make
Well,
arguments that Steph is all the way up at two for me, but it's one of these situations where that doesn't matter. It's the
mhm,
body of work for the whole season. Nikola Jokic led every single major offensive category, and Denver was cruising into the playoffs and had a real chance to win this conference until Jamal Murray went down. Like I think
yeah,
both of these things can be true. Like Steph can be the better player, but Jokic could have a better MVP argument for one season. Like these don't like if we were just giving the MVP to the best player every single year, then LeBron would have won this award for the past decade.
right, right. I completely agree. So, the other topic we wanted to get into as a warm up, which isn't necessarily an NBA topic, but it's kind of a media and sports star topic that I thought would be interesting because I know Kyrie this year had gotten a good amount of fines because he didn't want to talk to the media, and then uh, Naomi Osaka for tennis has come out and essentially said she's not going to talk to the media. I believe during specifically the French Open, but she
Yeah.
kind of left it open and, in my opinion, made it sound like it was going to be a thing going forward. And the way she did it, she was citing, mental health and a big part of why she didn't want to do it was like, I as an athlete have to go into these matches 100% believing in myself, and you go talk to the media and they don't necessarily 100% believe in me and ask me questions like, what if how are you going to go up against this person who's essentially better than you? And so she doesn't want to do it, doesn't want to talk to him. She was fined $15,000 the other day, and apparently, the French Open Commission people, forgive me for getting that probably wrong. They came out and essentially said like, "There's a chance you could get like disqualified for not talking to the media. It's your job. Like part of your job is talking to the media." And they actually came out. What was it? They said, as a sport, there's nothing more important than ensuring our player has no unfair advantage over another. Which, unfortunately, in this situation, if one player refused to dedicate time to participate in the media, while others honor their commitments, that could create an advantage. Which I thought was an interesting way to take it. And then she her follow up was a tweet that said, "Anger is the lack of understanding." Um, Changes make people uncomfortable.
Yeah,
So, how do you feel? Do you feel like it's an obligation of an athlete to talk to the media?
I don't feel like it's an obligation necessarily. So, because this debate always goes back and forth, and I think the French Open perspective is really interesting. I hadn't heard that part where they said it's an unfair advantage because I
And
haven't heard that before. Because I mean, this isn't the first time an athlete. I
right,
mean, we mentioned Kyrie. The most infamous one recently is Marshawn Lynch when he was playing in the Super Bowl with the Seahawks. Because I mean, the famous, y'all know why I'm here. I'm just here so I won't get fined.
and
And now we love Marshawn Lynch for that. And Marshawn Lynch is one of these guys who has gone out and just made himself available on so many other platforms that we kind of know who he is and know what he's about. But he just straight up said, listen, I don't want to do interviews. Like, I'll show up, but I'm not really just into this right now. I don't think it so because I think it's a little of both as always. Like I think athletes, it is to me, it is part of the game when it's like, listen, if you're into this, if you make it to this level, whether it's in the NBA, the NFL, NHL, MLB, whatever, like media and interest from fans and all this other stuff is just part of the business. Like this is part of the business that makes the industry successful. It gets people buying merch, it gets the fans interested. Like because it's not even just interviews always. Um,
well,
just from the
and
media, but on team levels as well with that content. And so I think like I do think a lot of times athletes should talk to the media, but I also like I'm not going to sit here and act like just because I work in the media and you work in the
right,
media that the media is always just perfect and holier than thou. Like I
no,
think there are a lot of times where we joke about it where there's just so many questions that either just completely have a lack of context or understanding, or people are going for those controversial questions that
yeah,
just generate clickbaity headlines. Like the goal of being a reporter when you go into a locker room is to get the most thought-provoking answers out of these athletes and
mhm,
not come up with the most cookie cutter questions and just the generic garbage that gets clicks and gets people interested and creates some of these narratives around people. Like I can understand athletes being frustrated with that, especially
of course,
when because I mean unfortunately a lot of the times is you can't publish like athletes quotes in full. I mean, you can put them out there on your own platform and stuff like that, but in the context of a newspaper column, in the context of a blog or whatever it may be, a podcast or a radio show, you don't have the time to play a full. If Kyrie Irving does a media availability and he's available for 15 minutes, like you can't just play 15 minutes of Kyrie Irving media availability on the radio. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. That's going to hurt that business as well.
mhm,
Likewise, if you're printing a column, but so I mean, like it's a little of both for me. Like I think athletes should talk to the media, and I think athletes who just love to dump on the media for no reason, it kind of is like, all right, fam, like it's part of the game. You know what you signed up for a little bit. Like I understand it can get draining, but I think there's draining things in every job. But I also think the media does need to get better in a lot of ways. Where and just the industry needs to get better in the sense that you need to just appreciate more in-depth reporting, more creative ways to report, like ask better questions, look beyond the headlines, like watch the tape, do the research. Like a lot of times people just don't do that and you
yeah,
just end up coming away with this garbage. And it's like if I was constantly misrepresented in situations that
of
and
course.
again I'm not saying Kyrie Irving is without fault here. Like Kyrie Irving does this to himself sometimes too, but if I was constantly misrepresented in certain situations, I would understand being frustrated as well. It's like, what do I want to talk to you guys for when you're just going to create a headache for me?
Yeah, and the best example that I can think of right now is with Trevor Lawrence coming to Jacksonville, right? The Jags are really good about this, where they'll actually just Facebook Live the entire press conference
Right.
or meeting with the media. They'll do that. And the very first meeting that Trevor Lawrence had in Jacksonville, he just flown in, and he's sitting down with Urban Meyer and all the guys, and the first 4 questions to Trevor Lawrence weren't even remotely football stuff. Wasn't even remotely Jag stuff. And everyone in the comments, I was watching it, are like, what are these reporters asking right now? And it was all these random,
Well,
things.
was it moving to the city and getting adjusted questions? Because I get
No,
that if you ask
no,
that first.
it wasn't. It was I forget. It was okay. I remember now. And I'm not going to call out the reporter who said it, but it was the question was, how many people have reached out to you to tell you congratulations through your phone? And is it more than you got when you won the national championship? And Trevor ended up saying, like, it was a good amount, something like it was a good amount, but after the national championship, I got a new number so that not everybody had my number. And then the follow up question was, what did you say back to everybody? And everyone's like, what are we doing here? We're asking
Yeah.
Trevor if he texts back people. Like, come on. Like,
Yeah, well, it's just random, and
yeah.
that I don't even necessarily think that's trying to be clickbaity. It's just super random. I mean,
It was trying to be,
like
like,
I remember.
friendly almost, and it was like, "Dude, you're the reporter, like, ask good questions."
Well, and with new players specifically, like I remember when we went to summer league, for example, like
Yeah,
when we were doing summer league in Orlando, like you always want to break the ice a little bit. So like if it's a brand new, so like
sure.
Jonathan Isaac, for example, was brand new in Orlando at the time when we saw him in Orlando summer league. Like that was one. And so I remember talking to Jonathan Isaac, and like one of the first questions I asked him is like, "Hey, you just got drafted here. I
Yeah,
know you went to Florida State, but have you gotten the chance to explore the city at all? Like, have you been around? Have you gotten to
and
where
that's
you're going to be
fine.
spending the majority of your life?" Like you can ask stuff like there's ways to break the ice, but you just got to be casual about it. Like
Yeah,
it's like just be a normal person. Like that's what all being a reporter is like if you act like normal people and you
yeah,
ask like I get understand like you have to press sometimes and you have to ask uncomfortable questions at the end of games. Like I do think that and that like listen, I get the frustration, but that is just part of the business,
but on top of
unfortunately.
that,
But
if
that's
you've
not like
created
mental health. That's just the
right,
situation. Like you have to do your job.
and if you've created a good, um understanding between you and that player, like if there is a chemistry there in a way, they're gonna understand that you have to ask those questions at times too. Like it's the good and the bad. But if you're there for only the bad or only the clickbaity stuff, that's when the players are gonna look at you like, dude, you're just here to make a story out of me. You weren't here when
Yeah.
we were doing good or bad or whatever. So I get that too. And I think taking it back to the comments that the French Open people put out, I think that's a little bit different than like an NBA take because the only the stars really necessarily talk to the media. Um, and so in that scenario, like the 16th guy or the 15th guy on the bench isn't sitting down with the media and taking questions after the game. So
Right.
I feel like that whole comment of like an unfair advantage, it's not really, that doesn't apply to the NBA. So it's hard to make that comparison over. But, in a single person sport like tennis, I could see where they're coming from. And if instead of taking her time to participate in the media, she's relaxing and resting, then maybe that does create an unfair advantage when they all agree that they would talk. I mean, I don't know the terms and contract stuff, but maybe there is a point where they've agreed to talk to the media a certain amount of times. And if you don't, then maybe that is taking advantage and potentially having a foot up on everybody.
Yeah, I mean, and there's greater issues here as well that I mean, we could do a
Sure.
whole
Sure.
podcast on the media because in terms of, just how people build reps for themselves and how, what type of questions you ask and how that factors in. You could talk about, diversity and the lack thereof a lot of times in medias, especially in smaller markets where you just may not even be getting questions from necessarily a different, variety of people. Like there's a whole like trust me, we could do a 2 hour podcast on the media, and that's just in sports.
Mhm.
That's not even getting into news and everything and entertainment and other things like that. But it's always complicated, and like everything else, there's a little of right and wrong on both sides. And I think in that situation, I just don't think either. I don't like when either one is holier than thou. Put it that way. It's like no, it's all part of the business, but like it does go both ways. It's not just on the athletes to be perfect. It is on the media to ask better questions and do their jobs well as well. Welcome, everybody, to the Driving Dish NBA podcast. My name is Kevin Rayfuse. Joining me, as always, my co-host, Justin Kuzart.
All I know is John Krasinski hit on both A Quiet Places. They are fire emoji.
So I've heard the first one is really good. I know the second one is coming out right now. I got to be honest, I haven't seen it. Obviously, John Krasinski is goated for me no matter what happens, just because of The Office.
Yeah.
I think pretty much everybody agrees with that at that point. Did you see these movies? Did you see it? Did you like it?
I've seen the first one. I haven't seen the second one, so I'm not quite sure if I can obviously speak on that.
No
I will
pun
say,
intended.
yeah, right. The first one was really good. Like
Okay.
it is. You go into it thinking, man, there's no talking. Like they're not going to talk at all. This is
Right.
horrible. But it really keeps you on the edge of your feet. Now, what they did with the end of the first one kind of opens it up into this whole world of people dealing with this situation, and there's a lot of angles you can take. So I'm interested to see the second one and how that goes. I didn't even know the second one was out already. So here we are.
Yeah, well, it's so weird. We're kind of in that because, like, I mean, here in America, we're kind of in that in between now because a lot of people have vaccines. Like, I'm fully vaccinated. Basically, like, it's available. If you want it, you can get it. There are more than plenty of places at this point to go get the vaccine. And so it's like this weird in between where like stuff is pretty quickly opening back up, but it's also still slow. Like, it takes time. So like movie theaters are back open, but obviously there haven't been a ton of movies coming out. So this is one of them.
Mhm.
Who tweeted this, by the way?
This would be a player who is not in the playoffs. Obviously, has a lot of time to be
Oh,
watching.
right. Gotta watch movies.
Josh Hart.
Oh, okay, nice. Shout out to Josh Hart.
Mhm.
Shout out to Chelsea Champions League, by the way. Champions of Europe. Josh Hart is a diehard Chelsea fan. And so
Okay.
Chelsea beat Man City 1-0 in the final. Come on, you Blues. You know how it goes.
Yeah, I know nothing about soccer. I can't even try to pretend.
It's all good, Justin.
I honestly, it's the one dude. I don't know why I can't get into it. Like I like all sports, so I'd imagine I would like it. I just can't get myself to do it. I can't get into it.
Yeah. I'm still recent. Like I've watched the World Cup like pretty religiously, obviously every 4 years when it happens.
Mhm.
I never really watched club soccer until it's 2 seasons ago now where I officially got in and said, okay, I'm rooting for Chelsea. This is what we're doing. I think what swung it for me is when I went to the Orlando City games. Like Orlando City home games down here in the MLS are a blast. Like they're just like it's like $25 to get in the door for standing room.
Yeah,
You're just chanting and yelling the whole time. Like you get the big, you get the big tall boys, and you just have a great time. And you watch
yeah.
soccer for 90 minutes. I think that's probably what started swinging it for me.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, anyway.
Well, and before we go any further, we do have to take a second. You might have to explain this to me a little bit more. But I'm happy to say that at least on this podcast, one of us is an award winner.
Oh boy. Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's weird. I don't like to talk about me like this, I guess, but yeah, I did. I won the 2020 Associated Press Best News Anchor for Florida Award.
Hell yeah.
Um, Definitely really pumped about that. It's been it's been a crazy year, obviously. So I don't want to, a lot of people have been going through stuff, and I'm grateful for everybody I work with at WDBO and my team who helps me make this possible on a daily basis. And I'm grateful for everybody who listens to this podcast, for you, Justin. And just everybody who keeps this career going. Like it's been a crazy year, but yeah, not it's pretty cool. I'm excited to get a little trophy for that. I don't get a ring for it, unfortunately, but got a little have a little trophy coming for the bookshelf. So definitely excited about that.
What is the what
First
is
number one, first win overall. Like I've been a part of team wins, but first
yeah.
individual win overall. So
Well, and to that, are you going to speak to the media, or are you also going to sit out for your mental health?
I'm gonna have a press conference. I'm gonna go live on Facebook. I'm gonna have a press conference. It'd be the most obnoxious thing ever, but no, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna like, yeah, I appreciate everybody. Like, it's been, it's cool to get recognized.
Sure, for sure. I completely agree. So be sure to follow the podcast on the YouTube page. We're growing the YouTube page. I freaked out the other day. YouTube must have had a glitch, and it said we had no followers. I was like, oh my god, we lost our only 8
We
people.
even lost. We even lost me and you.
Yeah, we lost all of us. But I think we're at 10 right now. So shout out to the initial 10 as we try to grow this thing. You can follow us on YouTube. Just search Drive and Dish NBA Podcast and follow us, subscribe. There's the videos of the podcast. We also are trying to do our best to clip parts, so the intros, the warm-up jumpers, the talks about specific teams so that you can kind of see specific points or go back and reference them if you want. So Drive and Dish Podcast on YouTube if you want to follow along.
Yeah, like the Facebook page. Find us everywhere you can find a podcast. iTunes, Apple, iTunes, Apple. Leave us a review on iTunes. Good or bad, to read them on the podcast. If you're not an Apple user, Stitcher, Google Play Store, Amazon Music, Spreaker, Spotify, Player FM, TuneIn, anywhere you can find a podcast, you can find us. And now a word from our sponsors.
So we start in the East because honestly, I feel like the East has been less exciting than the West in terms of matchups. So we're gonna save the West for the last because I think that'll be a little more exciting and keep the people through the whole podcast.
We got to reel you in.
Yeah, we got to keep you on board. So we start with 76ers Wizards. Philly leads 3-0. As of recording this, we are recording this on Memorial Day. We should take a second to mention that. But we are recording this on Memorial Day. So the 76ers do play tonight. And there's a chance that if the Sixers win, it's a sweep. They move on to the next round. Joel Embiid set a career-high playoff with 36 points the other night as the Sixers beat the Wizards 132-103. I mean, the wins have been pretty lopsided in terms of scoring. Embiid's playing well. The team in general is playing well. Philly led as much as by 31 on their third win, which is a franchise record, or the first time since 1985 that Philly's led by that or done a 3-0 series lead. I also saw this, which I thought was interesting. The game was the first playoff contest to be held at a major sporting event arena with an active sports book, which was accessible to fans in the 200 level on Wednesday, which I thought was kind of cool. I didn't know that was a thing, but that's kind of cool. As gambling becomes more and more involved, we'll see where it goes. Westbrook obviously dealing with that ankle injury. The 76ers seem to be clicking on all cylinders. I think all 5 starters had double figures in that win. So, I mean, not saying that we thought it was going to be essentially close. We kind of figured the Sixers would handle their business here, but is anything surprised you?
All right, so a couple things. Number one, again, thank you to everyone, all the fallen soldiers,
Yeah,
on this Memorial Day. Everyone, in history and in American history, and all the wars who are still actively serving. We appreciate you guys again. Thank you for your service, so that we can enjoy this weekend.
of course.
Number two, with the it's funny, back in the day they had smoking and non-smoking sections. Like, as gambling gets legal everywhere, you're gonna have gambling and non-gambling sections.
We're gonna have we're
you
gonna
have, you have a mad one for everybody's on their phone on FanDuel just going crazy. And the other
have,
section,
we're gonna have the stadium's gonna be sectioned off into 4 groups, right?
yeah.
One's going to be gambling section. One's going to be non-gambling section. You're going to have vaccinated section and non-vaccinated
Oh
section.
my
The
god!
whole stadium's just going to be sectioned off and cut it into like a pie, almost 4 different spots.
Yeah, they're each like the points on the compass at that point. Somebody gets north, somebody gets west. In terms of the series itself, I mean, yeah, like you said, this could very well be over by the time this episode drops. I mean, it could very well, it could be brooms out. I do think it's going to be quite honest. The only game that was really close was game 1, and I
Mhm.
think there was a lot of the Sixers shaking off the rust. I'm pretty sure they missed every jump shot possible in that game. Also, Joel Embiid got into early foul trouble, but like you said, I mean, just absolutely dominant. Joel Embiid, 36 points in 28 minutes, just completely took over every facet of that game. Just
Yeah,
looks like he's playing his best basketball of the year in the playoffs, which is exactly what you want to see. But like you said, the other starters excellent as well. Danny Green in double digits, Seth Curry in double digits. I think anytime those two are hitting shots like that and are over, 10, if you can get 12, 14 points out of them, I think you're going to have a shot to win every single game. Ben Simmons has been solid. He's been picking his spots, especially the second game. I mean, really taking over offensively. That's exactly what you want to see. Like, you can live without the lack of a jump shot if he continues to get into the paint and just attack and be in that type of mode. I
Yeah.
think that's been great to see, like, especially in that game too. You want to see that because they're going to need it if they're going forward. And then just Tobias Harris again as well. A career high 36 in the first game. For the playoff high for him, just been so consistent, over 20 every single of these games. I mean, especially in the first game. I mean, he was the only one in the first game who was doing any bit of, I mean, the Sixers very well could have been down 15, 20 points in the first half of the first game. You can attribute a lot of that to Rust, but congratulate or credit Tobias Harris for just stepping up and keeping the team
Mhm.
afloat. I mean, that's what he needs to do in those situations. That's what they're paying him to do. So that was definitely good to see. I think the Sixers are going to roll, get some rest in, and we'll see what happens with
Yeah.
this Hawks Knicks series. But I mean, the Sixers are the better team. Like we said, Russell Westbrook now dealing with the ankle injury. Bradley Beal has been good, but he's just he has that combo. He has Ben Simmons and Matisse Thybulle just surrounding him. I mean, they figured out kind of early the first game, especially when I mean they were putting Danny Green on him for times. Which again, Danny Green's a good defender, but it's like no, you need to have Ben and Matisse Thybulle guarding Bradley Beal at all times. He's without a doubt the best player on the floor for the Wizards.
Well, and I
So I
wonder if
think
they
what they've
can.
been able to throw at him has been impressive.
Yeah, and to that, I wonder if that's something that they will take into the next series. Whether I mean, I guess that's a perfect leeway into the Knicks and Hawks. Is say it's the Hawks that come out. Do you just do that to Trae Young too? Just always have someone on Trae Young essentially, and make his day miserable. So, um, I think that's something they could try to do. Obviously, Knicks Hawks series, Hawks lead now 3-1 after Sunday's game. The Knicks look a tad bit frustrated with Randle getting that technical foul, and I think Reggie Bullock also got a technical foul, if I'm not mistaken. The Hawks have won 13 consecutive home games, which is crazy if you think about it. Because Atlanta, I mean, at least the way I've always thought it was, Atlanta wasn't one of the places that was like the home crowd always gets them going or something like that. But um,
Wow,
it,
two cities you got today. Wow, don't go to Detroit
what?
or Atlanta anytime soon,
Listen,
Justin.
listen. I would love to go to a Hawks game in Atlanta. I would love to go. I would love to try it. When you talk about fan bases that make it like a home team advantage, like I just haven't heard of Atlanta being that. Maybe it's just the team hasn't been like you know really, really great recently to have that kind of situation going on, but now they
No.
do, and so shout out to them. Hawks looking to wrap up their first playoff series since 2016. I believe that game's going to be Wednesday night is when Game 5 is. So if you're the Sixers and you're watching this, I think if you're the Sixers, you kind of prefer the Knicks to win the next game and make this kind of a drawn out process.
Yeah.
So you get the rest. But would you rather play the Hawks or the Knicks? Because honestly, I think it's the Knicks.
I mean, if you're going given the way that they've looked in the playoffs right now, then I'm inclined to say if you would ask me before, I would have said the Hawks because I think the Knicks are a
Sure,
great defensive team. If you're
sure.
going off how I've looked in the playoffs, then I'm more inclined to say Hawks at this point. I do think the Knicks are going to win Game 5. I can't see them going out at MSG. That crowd's been just absolutely raucous. They had plenty of chances to win that first game. I mean,
Sure.
obviously Trey Young, just a massive, massive shot, shutting the Garden up. The Knicks did win game 2, but then the Hawks, like you said, using the home court advantage, winning both their games at home, defending their court. I think this is going to go 6. I do think the Hawks close on their court. They've looked a lot better overall for the series. I mean, the biggest things for me is again we talked about him earlier, but Julius Randle has not been super great, and neither is RJ Barrett. I mean, RJ Barrett has been essentially a non-factor in these last 2 games. That's the Knicks are just they need them to play well. Like those have been the 2 guys who have gotten you here to this point. Derrick Rose has been awesome, but Derrick Rose is one player at this point. You need them to step up. And I mean, this is the first time they've been here. I mean, RJ Barrett the first time in the playoffs, but Julius Randle, this has been the first time I think competing with expectations almost in a way. And so I definitely think they're going to regret game 1 the most because, like we said, I mean, this is a 2-2 series going back to MSG with the chance
You'd
to,
be feeling good.
have 2 of the final 3 on your home court. So I think that's where they're going to miss out. I do think the Hawks end up closing out on the series. Again, shout out to Trey Young, just been absolutely unstoppable in his
Mhm.
first playoff series. I mean, that the Knicks have had absolutely no answer for him. I do think the Knicks again will win game 5. I think Atlanta closes in 6. In terms of the matchups right now for the Sixers, I mean, here's the thing. Like, I think the Sixers match up great with Atlanta. Like during the regular season, like they handled their business with Atlanta pretty well every single time. It's one of these situations as well where they have the defensive personnel, particularly on the perimeter, to just stick on Trey. Clint Capella is an excellent defender, so I do think that he'll give Joel Embiid, like that's not a super easy matchup necessarily, but he did pretty well and even with John Collins, like getting them in foul trouble when they played as well in the regular season. So here's the thing. I think the Sixers have to win this series no matter what going up, no matter who they were playing coming out of the series. Like it would be a colossal mega failure if the Sixers were to get bounced in the second round to one of these teams,
Mhm.
particularly. It's the whole reason why we wanted that number one seed, wanted that side of the bracket, was to basically like, I don't think they're going to sweep the way that they're going to beat Washington, or the way that I think are going to with Washington. And again, I don't want to count my chickens too early, but like, I think the Sixers win in 5, whoever they play in this
Mhm.
next series. Like, I do think they're just it's the same way I feel about as we get later on. It's like whoever comes out of that Lakers Phoenix series, I think is gonna handle Denver or Portland pretty easily. Like,
Yeah.
eh,
Well,
it
I almost wish maybe it sounds weird, but I almost wish the 76ers at some point get this like, "Oh crap" moment where, like, they do get beat by, say, the Hawks or the Knicks, and it kinda, like, locks them in a little bit more because I don't want them to sweep their way through and go into a matchup against, say, the Bucks or the Nets, which is probably what it will end up being. Those will be
yeah,
the next 2 matchups or the 2 teams we'll be talking about in a second, but I don't want them to go into those games full sweep mode and where you're gonna have 2 teams that have been battling, right? Like, I kind of expect that to go 7. So if it does, whichever ever team you have coming in, yes, they're not going to be rested as well as the 76ers might potentially be, but they're going to be coming in hot, and I don't know if, maybe it's just because of teams in the past and what I've had with the 76ers. Like, I don't know if they'd be ready for that kind of smoke right off the rip. Like, I want them to have that, like, hey, check yourself game to kind of like lock it back down and kind of scare everybody into being like, okay, hey, this is the playoffs. We need to like really be focused in here.
no, see, I'm the exact opposite. I want them to destroy everybody, like
Yeah,
including Washington, including whoever they play here. Like that to me is the statement. Like
sure.
game 3 in Washington was to me the most the statement so far, where it's like, no, this is a different iteration. We're here. We're
Mhm.
handling our business. Like that to me, the Sixers are going to be the favorite in any series that they come with. Like it, I understand that there's that level of competition and that you're battling it out if you're Brooklyn and Milwaukee, where it's like if you win that series, whoever comes out of that is going to be the preemptive favorites, in
Sure.
my opinion, to whoever they play against the Sixers. But the Sixers handling their business like that to me is more impressive than them having an off game and letting, not that I think doubts are going to creep in, but I do think this is a more resilient bunch than the past. Like I do think they're more equipped for this moment. There's a lot of veterans in that locker room, so I think they're going. Like I want them. I don't actually. I don't want that. Like besides the fact that obviously I, as a fan, don't want to see them lose.
Sure.
I think I want to see them handle their business. Like them. Like if I see them struggle against Atlanta and that ends up going 6 or 7, or against New York, if they're able to pull this comeback off, I'm going to be a lot more concerned going into a matchup against Milwaukee or Brooklyn, 2 teams that I have a ton of respect for, who I think could very well be the favorites in the conference. I need the Sixers to be firing on all cylinders. Like they never gave Washington a chance in games 2 and 3. And that's kind
Yeah.
of what I want to see here with the next series. Like, no, you are this heavyweight, act like it. And
Yeah.
then if they end up going out and they get smoked by another team in the Eastern Conference Finals, then so be it. Then you reevaluate from there. But you at least want to, because I do think they're going to hang with whoever comes in the Eastern Conference Finals. Like they may not be the favorites, but like they could win the conference still. Like
Yeah.
if that team is clicking the way they did in Game 3, I think they can beat anybody.
Yeah.
So
I agree. So let's talk about the first sweep that did happen. Bucks Heat. Bucks just
insane.
whoa. Um, yeah, I mean, I really that's the only word I can think of, just going like, wow, they came in hot. I was reading something. Jimmy Butler was 19 for 64 in this matchup, which it has to be by many standards probably the worst of his career.
Oh yeah, it's the worst playoff series he's ever had. Like
Yeah.
it was unbelievably bad with how again, just given with what we saw last year, given with what we've seen in the past in the playoffs, like this is Jimmy Butler. It was uncharacteristically
Mhm.
just it was shockingly bad,
Well,
especially after the first game. Because the first game to me, I mean, was an overtime win
yeah.
that took an incredible Chris Middleton shot, and in that first game, and I think that's why it was so crucial to Milwaukee. Like we talked about this a little bit when we previewed this series. Milwaukee just again last year was so shocked. They had those mental demons. Like Milwaukee, I think in the Eastern Conference more than anybody had those playoff demons, if you will, to contend with. You wanted to see Giannis
Yeah,
come out and dominate. You wanted to see this team like win a meaningful series. They not only again drew Miami and essentially picked the bracket their way by winning that last game in the regular
then
season.
just worked
I
them.
mean, the fact that they like, and maybe it was as simple as that game one, because after game one, that switch flicked and it was never close. I
Mhm.
mean, they came out and they thoroughly dismantled Miami. And again, Miami was a 6 seed. I think this team during the regular season objectively was worse than the version last year. So maybe, but at the same time, like they were playing their best basketball of the season. Like they were that last month of the regular season super impressive. They were putting themselves in a situation to look like they were going to make a run again. Like
Yeah.
you said, super competitive in that first game. And then it just totally fell apart. I mean, they couldn't play offense in those last 3 games. I mean, Bam looked totally out of rhythm. He was completely getting shut down. Drew Holiday, I thought was excellent just defensively all over the perimeter, making an impact. I mean, his plus minus stats for the Bucks, and I mean that's been the big key to me is just again, Drew Holiday is a playoff player. Like he's the type of guy you want come this time of year. He just
Mhm.
plays winning basketball. He does everything on both ends of the floor right. He's been such a massive upgrade over Eric Bledsoe. Like that's the thing, because I know initially, like you balk at the price, and I still do a little bit as well, where it's like, whoa, you gave up 4 first rounders for Drew Holiday, like. Drew Holiday is not a top 10, 15 player in the league, but he's exactly the type of guy that you want come playoff time. He's exactly what this Bucks team needed. I also think you factor that in with the cost of doing business of keeping Giannis, where it's like,
Mhm.
listen, you need to make these type of changes in order to lock your homegrown superstar in. So I think you're obviously more than okay with that. And Giannis super impressive again. Just I think he has so many more ways to score and dominate this year. Look, the Bucks put everybody on alert. Like, I mean, Brooklyn has been my number one consensus pick, and we'll get into Brooklyn and Boston here in a sec. I still think with those three, they're my on paper favorite to win the Eastern Conference. But I'll tell you what, the Bucks look like the best team in the. I mean, I thought this was going 7. If you pull the last pod, my prediction sounds absolutely insane right now. Milwaukee, it looks like they. I mean, forget the demons. It looks like they shook them off after one game. It's like Chris Middleton hit that shot and they said, "Oh, we're here." Now, obviously a massive downside, and what's going to hurt them in the next series is losing Dante DiVincenzo. That
Yeah.
matters, a big deal. He's been a massive part of the rotation. He obviously, like the Bucks' 3-point shooting has been tremendous this year. He's a huge part of that. Like that is going to be, it's going to be a little tough to replace. Like against a team like Brooklyn, against a team like Philly, against the Western Conference teams, that's going to matter if they're going to continue going further, losing a key guy or your rotation like that. So I do think that is worth watching. But
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about how difficult their path could be, starting with Miami and what we thought this was going to be a really tough series. Again, we saw what they did to them last year. They basically, Miami took Milwaukee's lunch money. It was the exact opposite this year. I mean, that you talk about redemption. I mean, what a redemption series for Milwaukee. I mean, they punched Miami in the mouth. Like I'm stunned. I'm still stunned as we're kind of recording this podcast. Like I thought Milwaukee was going to win this series. Oh baby, I didn't think they were just going to come out here and just do that. That was an ass whooping.
Well, and I read something that I guess this is the third consecutive season that a team coming off the NBA Finals loss didn't win a postseason game, which is kind of crazy if you think about it.
Wow.
But yeah, man, it was just like a colossal just fall apart on the Heat side of things. Um, yeah, DiVincenzo, like you were saying, with that torn tendon and his left ankle is gonna hurt a little bit, and you'd imagine going into a Nets matchup, you want everybody 100%, obviously. From a Bucks standpoint, you kind of hope Boston wins the next game, maybe can take it another game. But to that, Jaylen Brown and Kemba Walker are both out. Jason Tatum just can't seem to really just do it on his own, you know?
I mean, he's trying. I'll
Yeah.
tell you what, he did in game 3, and he certainly tried in
Yeah.
game 4. I mean, Jason Tatum is so damn good. I mean, he is just so good. And I mean, and honestly, I'm impressed in a way with what Boston has done. I mean, I thought this was going to be a sweep. Game 1 was way more competitive than I thought. Game 4 was competitive. I mean, here's the thing: Game 4 turned into a scoring fest, and you're just not going to outscore Brooklyn. I mean, Brooklyn put 141 points on the board, but give Boston credit; they put 126 up. I'm impressed with the way Boston has fought. I thought this was going to be kind of a rollover and die series. It hasn't been. Um, Brooklyn up 3-1. I think getting that game 4, they will close out in game 5. Like, don't get me wrong. I think Brooklyn will
Mhm.
handle their business, but Boston, I mean, they legitimately could have made this interesting if they won that game 4. We would be asking, I think, a lot more questions about Brooklyn had that
Yeah.
happened. But again, just you're right, like not enough firepower. We knew that once Jalen Brown went down, and then especially having to deal with Kemba injuries as well. I think you're encouraged on a couple of other fronts, like you said, obviously, and mainly number one was just how well Jason Tatum has played. Um, but I mean, Brooklyn's going to handle their business. They always were just the better team in this series.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's kind of written in stone. We're gonna get our Bucks Brooklyn matchup, and I think that one's gonna be a slugfest,
Oh
if
yeah.
you will, which I'm excited for because we haven't necessarily had that in the East as of right now. I feel like all the slugfest first round battles are happening out west, which is actually why we saved it for the second half of the episode here.
Yeah, no, I mean, the only one you thought the Knicks and Hawks might be.
Sure.
It looked like it after
And
3
it
games,
has
but
been a little bit. I mean, they've been closer and they've been battles, so I would say they would be the closest to a intriguing battle, in the East.
I just still can't believe Milwaukee, man. That is, I mean, I'm talking about the Sixers making a statement. They look good about being up 3-0. Milwaukee sweeping Miami out of the playoffs is a statement upon
Mhm.
statements. That Brooklyn series is going to be fun, like we said. They're not there yet. Boston, again, they could pull it off. Crazier things have
Sure.
happened in the world, but that's going to be a hell of a second round matchup. I can't wait to talk about that. All right, who's balling, who's falling? Our NBA version of the stock market. We always like to start with the good before the bad. Justin and I actually have a mutual Ballin and Fallin this
Mhm.
week. So first up, Ballin, we have the fans because wow, it is great to have everybody back. I mean, the first talk, obviously, I think is the Garden, the first one, just obviously with New York not having been in the playoffs in so long, with them being at full capacity. I mean, it was loud. Like you could tell just from watching it. But it's not just New York. I mean, for example, with Utah and Memphis the other night. Utah ended up winning game 3 of that series, and we'll get into that series in a little bit. But I mean, Memphis was electric when Grayson Allen hit that
Mhm.
3 and took the lead in the fourth quarter. Every one of these venues has been absolutely rocking. The Sixers are going to get back to full capacity here in a little bit. Most are at 100% at this point. Um, I think the bubble was great a lot of times because these guys had the just one-on-one ability to play each other, and you just kind of could see these crazy offensive outbursts and performances like that. But I got to be honest, like you knew the fans were a factor, but I really did. I underestimated how much I loved seeing NBA playoff games in full arenas and the ebbs and flows of the crowd. Because even vice versa, like there is something to be said. Like when Trey Young hit that dagger in the Garden, there is something to be said about watching that crowd just totally lose its life as well.
Mhm.
It's great having the fans back.
Well, and he is all about being the enemy. Like he I think even
Oh
after
yeah,
that first game, he was talking about. He's like, "There's been a lot of guys that Madison Square Garden has hated. I'm happy to be on that list now." So that was kind of cool too. But yes, I agree. And especially this year, I feel like it's an extra advantage because he played an entire, essentially, season and then another season and a half in playoffs without fans. So now that there's fans there, it's a whole different vibe that you haven't had for an entire season. So I think it is kind of a cool little um a vibe that's going on. So shout out to the fans for being back, and also an unshout out to the fans for being back because some of them are being idiots.
yeah, that's our that gets into our fallen this week. It's also the fans because what the hell has we're gotten into everybody
Mhm.
recently here in the NBA, and I think player safety is something that's going to get addressed for sure. But I mean, just recently, I mean, in Philly, we saw the popcorn get dumped on Russell
Yeah.
Westbrook as he was going out. Somebody apparently in New York tried to spit on Trey Young. In Utah, there was the incident of with John Morant's parents where they were just harassing the hell out of John Morant's mom in the stands. We saw last night somebody in Boston threw a water bottle at Kyrie Irving. It's just like what is wrong with like y'all? I know everybody's been cooped up in the house for a long time, but I don't understand what exactly thinks when you go into arena that you just suddenly could be an asshole and start like treating these players like
Yeah.
I mean, Kevin Durant said it best. Like, this isn't the circus. Like, you don't have the right just because you buy a ticket. Like, you can boo and you can and heckle and all that stuff, but you just don't get the free license to go at everything. And even if it's something, it's just unacceptable. And we've seen situations where there are investigations, like with the Sixers, for example, that fan in Philly who dumped the popcorn, Russell Westbrook, he was a season ticket holder who now is banned from the Wells Fargo Center indefinitely. He got his season tickets revoked for the playoffs instantly, right away, for maybe the best Sixers team that we've seen in our lifetimes. It's just like, what is going through your head when you're a season ticket holder? And on top of that, it's even more classless when it's somebody who's injured. But
Yeah.
just across the board, it's like, I don't understand that, feed into the atmosphere. I'm excited to have these fans back. Like, they do make a difference. Like, you can definitely, like, heckle, chant, do all these things. Like, that's a part of it. Like, be a home court advantage. But there's a difference between being a home court advantage and just being an asshole. And that's what it's really been. Like, it's happening in every single arena. And I think the players absolutely have the right to be concerned, because what happens when it becomes something serious? Like, what if that water bottle hits Kyrie Irving? Like, what if it hits him in the back of the head? What if it hits him while he's playing? Somebody trips on it and, God forbid, like, blows their knee out or something
Mhm.
crazy like that. Like, what is, like, I just, it's really disappointing to see, because it's like, we're so excited to have everybody back, and it's just like, everybody's like, stop acting up. Like, I don't know what's going on, and it is kind of one of these situations, like, you never, obviously, we'll never see it happen that way, but it would, I would like to see players get the right to confront these idiots after the game, where it's like, because you wouldn't do that on the street. Like Russell Westbrook
Right.
said it best in the post game. It's like, you wouldn't go up to him on the street and dump popcorn on him, because there would be consequences. So it's like, you don't get to do this. It's the same way when people troll on the internet. It's like, you don't get to do this just because there may not be consequences. And I think people like, there need to be consequences for these people. Like, y'all got to be like, whoever gets caught, like, kick them out forever, and they should be publicly, like, shamed a little bit in a
Mhm.
way. To me, it's like, you don't get the right to just go in here, and it's across the board in sports. Like, that's not just an NBA thing. Like, that's a, like, just so you buy a ticket doesn't mean you get the right to just go in and do whatever you want. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I completely agree. You're not allowed to do that stuff. It's embarrassing in a way where it's like, "Man, we haven't had this for an entire year, and we come back now, and you guys are acting like idiots," and I'm sure a lot of it's alcohol involved and liquid courage and or just, clouding the judgment, but it's still like, "Man, oh man,
Yeah.
we are showing why we don't deserve to be in a stadium right now," and again, I think a lot of people will argue, like, it's just a few people that are doing it. I'm sure the majority of people are doing it fine, but right, but like this can't be a thing. And
No,
it's probably going to get to a point where like it's going to get to a point where like you're not going to be able to sit like on a courtside situation. Like they're going to have to separate the fans from the people a little bit more, and then that's no fun for anybody. No one wants to deal with that. So I just it's disappointing to see and you hate to see it. So
yeah, if
um,
you don't punish an action, it's just going to keep happening. It's going to
right.
get further. And so that's the thing, is you got to drop the book on these people. Like, snuff
Yeah.
this out right away.
Yep.
Like, just enough. And it's happening across the board. And then a lot of times it takes away from everything good that's happening. It's like, again, we talk about the Garden. The Garden hasn't seen playoffs since 2013. It is absolutely electric.
Hmm.
My barber is a Knicks fan. He's more excited than he's been in ages. Like, everybody that I talk to, all my friends up in New York who've been able to go in, like, it
Pumped
is
about it.
like, I, as a Sixers fan, want to be in that arena just to feel the energy. It is so hype. It's like watching a heavyweight fight with them in Atlanta, going back and forth, like basket for basket in game one, things like that. Stuff like that, when some idiot is trying to spit on Trey Young, is going to take away from that. Like, it takes away from all the good that's happening. When the Sixers won that second game, they go out and they just blow the doors off the Wizards. They took them to the woodshed, essentially. And all we're talking about after the game is popcorn getting dumped on Russell Westbrook. It's like, no,
Mhm.
I don't like, you're taking, not only are you taking away and just being ridiculous, you're taking away from the performance. Like, we should be talking about the team right now, and we're not. So basically, just
Yep.
don't act like an idiot. Like, that's just what it all comes down to. And if you don't, like, and if you're drinking, control your liquor. Like,
Well,
Justin and I have been inebriated in plenty of sporting events, and we've never thrown water bottles at players. Like, it's
nope.
just, it's common sense. Stop being
Yep.
an idiot. Don't throw your season tickets away. All right, let's go over to the Western Conference. Like you said earlier, this is really where the majority of, closer competitive playoff series have begun. Up and down across the board have been really good. Again, we'll just kind of start with seeds and go in bracket order again, and start with Utah and Memphis. A 2-1 Utah lead right now. Memphis going out and winning the first game, and I think putting everybody on alert. Of course, Donovan Mitchell did not play in that game. That was
Mhm.
subject of a little bit of controversy afterwards. Utah came back, evaded or survived, I should say, John Morant's 45 points, a career high for him in the playoffs. Being able to withstand that barrage, winning game two. Of course, a really competitive game three. Utah led for most of the game, Memphis clawed their way back in, no pun intended, took the lead in the fourth quarter, and then Utah just closed the door to me, and then took this 2-1 lead. Game 4 is in Memphis. It's later tonight, actually, so as I was recording this, we'll know what happens. But either way, a really competitive series. I mean, I think if you're Memphis, you got to be thrilled that you're hanging around. Again, still there's a very good chance they could tie this thing up tonight. I don't think anyone would be shocked there necessarily. But my biggest takeaway so far has just been I was really impressed with Utah in Game 3, the way they reacted. Like that, given the way, like we said, that crowd was, given the run that Memphis was on, like that could have put Utah with the double digit lead they had. Like they could have easily folded, and that could have been like a series changing, momentum changing win for Memphis, getting that first win at home. And then all of a sudden, Game 4 kind of becomes a must win if you're Utah. Instead, those last 4 minutes, they totally closed the door. Donovan Mitchell hitting multiple big buckets. Rudy Gobert was everywhere. I think that was the biggest thing. And that, to me, one of the things that NBA Twitter always has their biggest debates about is Rudy Gobert, Rudy Gobert's impact, and just how good is he. Because obviously not the best offensive player, but one of the best rim protectors, frankly, we've ever seen. If you're looking at the numbers, and I think that's been the biggest thing. Like in those 4 minutes, Rudy Gobert's defensive brilliance was on full display. He totally closed the paint down. We know the way John Morant likes to attack and the way they like to then drive and kick off that. They just are unable to when he's there. And I think it's like the on-off numbers for John Morant when Rudy's on versus Rudy's off are just glaring. I think Ja's 9 points better overall when Rudy Gobert's off the floor. I think that's the type of game that, when you show Rudy Gobert's defensive impact, when you show how good he is, if you point back to the tape of the specific game, I would show those last 4 minutes. He was everywhere, and they shut that Memphis offense down, and they were able to end up comfortably cruising to a Game 3, which, like we said, with 4 minutes left, was really close. If you looked at the final score, you wouldn't have thought that.
Yeah, and to that, I think a big part of this, yes, Rudy Gobert deserves a big part of it too. But I also think a big part of it too is like you were saying, Donovan wasn't there for the first, game. And
Yeah.
that's the one Memphis got. So Donovan, in a way, was kind of that difference maker. And I remember thinking after the first game is like, man, that was close. If Donovan Mitchell was playing, they probably would have gotten that. And then we're talking about a 3-0, potential Utah lead right now in the series. But you alluded to it, a little bit of controversy with that, but you want to make sure Donovan's good. And I know he's kind of mentioned he's not 100%, although it seems like he's feeling fine. He's playing well. And so I think that was almost like the difference maker. And it's just enough to just get Utah past Memphis. Like it's going to be enough. I think this one's going to be over, sooner than later. I think you said they play tonight, so I'd imagine Utah gets it again, and we're moving on here. It just took a second, for Utah to feel Memphis out and get Donovan back. And you'd imagine as the games go on, Donovan's just going to get more and more comfortable again, and we'll be fine, as long as he doesn't re-aggravate his ankle. But yeah, it's. I think in general, if you're Memphis, you're pleased with what's happened and how competitive you've made this series, because I don't think everybody would have given him that kind of benefit of the doubt going into it.
No, I mean, most people I don't think had like most people I don't think even had Memphis. I mean, making the play-in. We go all the way back to the Warriors with how it looks. I
Yeah,
mean, people didn't have Memphis going this far. Memphis's average age of all their main rotation players is like 24 years old or something like that, I think. So to that point, that all these games have been competitive, that I don't think this is just going to be. I do think I'm in the same boat as you. Like, I think Utah is going to close the series out. I think it's probably over in 6 at the latest. I think if Utah wins tonight, it's over. I think they close out in Utah then, and they're
sure.
moving on. I do think that, like, there's a reason Utah won 52 games. I think the depth is crazy this year. Like, they have multiple guys who can step up, between Bogdanovich, between Ingles, between Jordan Clarkson. Like, we haven't even necessarily seen the best version of this Jazz team so far. But no, you have to absolutely be thrilled if you're the Grizzlies right now, given the way that your young guys, like, this experience is so important for guys like Jaren Jackson, for guys like Dylan Brooks, for guys like Xavier Tillman, for the bench who stepped up recently. Even for a guy like Grayson Allen, like
John
you're
Morant too.
getting. Yeah, well, yeah, and that's the other thing too, is, I mean, the national John Morant party has just come out. Like, he's
Mhm.
been, I think there were people who were worried about the slump a little bit this year. I think it was more pronounced at times than others. But I mean, he looks like the franchise player that you thought he could be last year when he won the Rookie of the Year. Like we said, with this Memphis core, you wanted to see them grow. You wanted to see them take the next steps. They have more than taken the next steps the next year. So no matter what happens, I think this is a success for Memphis. That said, there's a reason Utah's the number one seed. They were the reason there was the best team and fully healthy. I think they are just a little bit better than this Memphis team, and I think they're going to move on. I think it's probably over in 5. All right, moving down a little bit here to the 4-5 series, which is totally flipped. I mean, when Jake Fisher and I, shout out to Jake again for coming on the podcast, go get the book, Built to Lose, how the NBA's tanking era changed the league. But it was 2-0. Dallas went in, and you and I last week, we talked about, I thought this was, and by betting odds as well, this was one of the more lopsided series. People thought the Clippers were going to totally handle their business. Instead, we were getting ready for Clippers slander. It looked like Dallas goes in and just completely dominates these first 2 games, closes it out, pretty convincing wins on the road. And just like that, everybody's ready to mock Paul George. He's saying, yo, it's not the end of the world. We're not really feeling it yet, when it's like, Paul, you're down 0-2. Like, if there's no urgency, what is? Give the Clippers credit. They responded. Now we're tied here at 2-2. They've gone into Denver, handled their business, won both of these games. We're now down to a best-of-3 series. I got to be honest. Nothing would surprise me with this anymore. Like, I'm at the point where I just don't know what to expect with the Clippers, because the first 2 games, Kawhi game 2, for example, Kawhi had 41 points, Paul George had 28, and they still lost. It's like, you can't even blame you can't blame it on playoff P this year, for example.
But a lot of people are trying to, or were, when it was 2-0, they were trying to put a lot of blame on Kawhi Leonard. And, I just looked this up because I was curious. Like, Kawhi Leonard is balling out of his mind right now, which makes it so wild. I mean, he's shooting 62% field goal percentage in the playoffs right now, 47%, almost 48% from 3, with about 4 assists a game, almost 9 rebounds. Like, 2.5 blocks, or 2.5 steals, 1 block a game. Like, he's everywhere. And I saw some chatter on Reddit about him being potentially one of the best, players in the postseason right now, if not the best player in the postseason right now. So, like, there's a lot of slander going his way, and I think it's because people don't necessarily see him or view him as like a quote unquote leader of a team, and that guy that can kind of like sit out there and be the vocal person for the team. And I wonder if that's a part of it. But man, oh man, he's balling out, and it showed. At least now that the series tied, I think people are looking at it like, oh wow, he actually is, playing the way he needs to be playing. Where if it was 3-0, or if they got swept and he still had these numbers, I think people would still be like, he needs to lead the team better or something,
He was 11 of 15 for 29 points the other night. He had 10 rebounds. It's just like, if you're blaming Kawhi Leonard for this, I don't really know what exactly you're watching. I mean, he's been pretty much everywhere. Really impressive to me, though, to hold the Dallas to 81 points.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a team that's been lighting it up offensively this entire series. I thought that's something to really build your hat on going forward if you're the Clippers. So I think that's definitely a good look for them. I don't know. I can't shake a weird feeling now that the Clippers are going to just mess around and somehow win the series 4-2. Like, they started slow, and I worried about that. And again, we've got a crucial game 5 coming up here, but I don't know. Like, we were all ready to write the Clippers off, and I think it started to look valid. Where it's like, is this team built for the playoffs? Like, what is going on here exactly? Like, how are they just totally unable to handle their business like this?
Mm-hmm.
But then they handled them completely in game 3 and 4. So I think it's like, have they turned it on? I don't know. This team is like Jekyll and Hyde, I feel like, more than any other in the NBA. But I still, like, my pick was them going before, or my pick before this was to beat Dallas, or for them to beat Dallas, no matter what happened in the series, in those first 2 games. I'm still sticking with that. I think it may be over in 6, as crazy as that sounds.
Well, and so the AP did a whole, like, post game blog type stuff about this, and I guess one of the big factors in game 3, which kind of flipped everything over into LA's favor a little bit, is they started going with a smaller lineup, and actually starting Batum, so that they have all the scorers essentially out there that can just shoot from 3. And I guess, that ended up starting to throw off the Mavericks a little bit. And so you wonder if that's a big part of it, and maybe a trend that can keep going. And if that's the case, is a small ball lineup like that going to be able to work against whoever you're going up against in the next few series, and see how that goes and where it ends up. But that, at least as of right now, if you got Luka with this neck injury, You got Luka who can't make a free throw, which is the most absurd. It's the most wild thing in the world.
He's got a higher field goal percentage than a
Yeah.
free throw percentage right now. Like, that's bananas.
Yeah, it's almost like I wonder. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at his free throw percentages, like throughout his career in general. But it's like, is it kind of like a field goal kicker thing where like now you're just overthinking it, almost like a Markelle Fultz type situation where like you're in your own head about it, and that makes it worse. Like I don't know what's going on there, but that's a wild thing going on, and obviously the neck could be a factor as well. So yeah, I think you as the Clippers, don't change anything. Keep going small ball and let them try to adjust. And if they can't, then you're going to get the series. And if they do, then it's on Lou, to potentially find another way to adjust again and keep it going. But they're roaring hot right now and probably going to keep it going, in my opinion. And I just wonder how serious this neck thing is, because they were talking about how like Luka can't necessarily look left easily. He looked like he was in a lot of pain. And if that's the case, there goes Luka's court vision a little bit, and that makes things harder for him to orchestrate an offense. So I am curious to see the neck injury and how far down the line it goes. I think they have 2 days to break and hopefully rehab that a little bit. And so we'll see where he is.
Yeah, you hope it's not too serious. Obviously, you just don't want to see a series ruined by injury.
Sure.
But again, certainly one of the more intriguing ones to watch. Just
Well,
plenty of unpredictable twists
you
and
know,
turns in that one. I want to have later. We're not going to do this now, but because we have two more series to break down, I know this episode is approaching an hour already. But I really, really, we're going to get a Dallas writer on here at some point. I really want to have an in-depth Kristaps Porzingis talk because,
yeah.
wow, like what a I mean, it's been a long way from unicorn status because I mean, I remember even 4 or 5 years ago how highly we were talking about this guy, and it just seems like it's not
Well,
there right now. Obviously, injuries could be a big part of that as
yeah.
well, but I do want to take a longer look at that later on.
Well,
But
and to what you were saying, I mean, you talk about injuries with Porzingis, and you talk about injuries in general with the NBA, and series being potentially ruined because of injuries. That could be the entire vibe between this Suns Lakers matchup, right?
Mhm.
With Chris Paul's shoulder, with now Anthony Davis and Davis Caldwell Pope also out. Like it just seems like both teams keep getting injured, and it swings the momentum one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, we this was going to be a heavyweight fight no matter what.
Sure.
I mean, obviously crucial for Phoenix to win Game 4. They had to have that one. And Phoenix dealing with a not 100% Chris Paul because, of course, just cruel and unusual Chris Paul
He's
injuries
got to
in the
be
playoffs.
cursed, right? Like
Yeah,
he can't stay healthy in the playoffs ever. And it's like,
it's
dude,
legitimately unfair at this point.
yeah,
And I mean, especially for Phoenix, obviously having not been here in so long, and for this being the best Phoenix team in probably well over a decade.
yeah,
That said, really impressive Game 4. The Lakers dealing with injuries as well. Obviously, the big thing to watch here is Anthony Davis with that groin strain. If he's not 100%, then the
yeah,
Lakers might be in trouble. Like Phoenix is not the type of team who you unfortunately can be 100% against. I think the Lakers figured some stuff out in Game 3. So credit Phoenix for bouncing back early on because the big struggles were the early talking point after Game 1. I mean, Andre Drummond was getting run off the floor. DeAndre Ayton on the other side just absolutely dominating. Devin Booker at points in Game 1 I thought was the best player on the floor. Just was
mhm,
absolutely dominant. Um, it's been back and forth. Again, I thought this was a series that was going 7 games. So they're going to go. They're going to go back to Phoenix now. Of
yep,
course, again, another great crowd. Um, I think the Lakers squeezed this out in 7, but the
yeah.
injuries are worth watching. Like that's the one thing where it's like you can't lack against Phoenix. Like this is not a. It's unfortunately just not the type of playoff series where you could be 100%. Like this team is just way too good at this point. LeBron looks completely healthy, which I think is the most encouraging thing going forward. And the most important thing, obviously, if you're the Lakers, is like he looks like that ankle injury is completely not a factor. I mean, obviously, everyone points back to the dunk the other day where we almost gave Caruso a high five midair, essentially. But I still take Chris because Chris Paul is clearly limited a bit as well. But these are two deep squads. And again, credit to Phoenix for really turning up the intensity and winning a must-win game for them in Game 4. We'll see what happens. I'm excited. I mean, this to me, again, the Western Conference is loaded with these incredible playoff series.
I agree. They're incredible playoff series. I am willing to say if Anthony Davis is out, it's got to be over for the Lakers. Like I get it, you can't
Oh
bet
yeah.
against LeBron, but if Anthony Davis is out in any way, I don't see the Lakers getting past the Suns.
No, I don't either. And that's really the most importantly thing worth watching. Um, you know, again, it's a strain. Thankfully, I don't think we know too much yet. They have a little bit of time. Game one is tomorrow, or game one. Game five is tomorrow. As of recording this on June 6th, then they've got 2 days until game six. Like you said, he's got to be 100%, or Phoenix is going to win this series. Chris Paul is on the floor and he's limited, but they may have just enough to squeak by. Obviously, that would totally descend everything into chaos. Then, so we'll see what happens. I'm still picking Lakers in seven. It's going to be close though. There's
Yeah.
no not it. And again, the Lakers have a task. Like they got to. Phoenix has two home games. Like game seven is going to be at home. So we like we said, a really really excellent playoff series there. The final playoff series. I mean, this one's been excellent as well with Denver and Portland. This is tied at 2 as of recording this. I mean, game four was really the crazy one to me, obviously, just because of how badly Dame played. Like, if you told me Dame Lillard was going to play that bad in a playoff game, I would have told you Portland lost by 40
Yeah.
points or something like that. Instead, playoff Norm Powell back in the building. They comfortably win this game by 20 points. I mean, good for Portland's depth for stepping up because that was a big one for sure. And again, like we said, you don't want to go down 3-1. You got 29 points out of Norm Powell. Yusuf
Mhm.
Nurkic looked great, 17 points, 6 of 8 from the floor, 21 points out of CJ McCollum. I mean, Damian Lillard was 1 of 10 in a playoff game, and the Trailblazers won this game by 20 points. Like I think that's one of the more like the Bucks sweeping Miami is still the most unbelievable thing to me.
Mhm.
That's pretty unbelievable. If you had scripted that and told me the Blazers would win that game.
If you're the Nuggets, that hurts because that was your chance to strike. Like that was the only window that you're gonna get where that's gonna happen. Like Dame doesn't do that, right? Like that
No.
doesn't happen for Dame. So the fact that you didn't capitalize on it hurts. And we'll see where it goes.
It
Uh,
was a brutal game for Denver's starters as well.
Agreed.
I mean, Michael Porter Jr. had 3 points. Aaron Gordon had 6
Yeah.
points. It just really, really not
Well,
great. Austin Rivers, he had the Austin Rivers game in game 3. He was absolutely great, but
yeah.
only 8 points in game 4. Jokic even only had 16. Like, Portland not known as a defensive team, but they certainly got the job done in this
Well,
game.
and it's been fun to watch, Nurkic and Jokic go at it again. I mean, I think Nurkic fouled out the first 2 games and stayed out of foul trouble in the next. But I think those two are always fun to watch because of the history between them with Denver and all that stuff. So that's always fun.
Mhm.
The other thing that's kind of interesting that I saw talked about here. So game 3 of the series was blacked out for viewers in Denver because of a dispute between Comcast and Altitude Sports, which I guess is the people that have the game
Yeah,
right.
it's
Game
a main
3.
provider out there. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a potential game 5 could have the same problem. That's absurd to me. Like, I get it that you're going through these disputes and stuff like that, but it's like, dude, it's Denver. Like, you come on, you know?
Well, so I'm assuming because it's blacked out that they can't get the national feed, right?
You can only watch it. So only subscribers to DirecTV could watch if you're in Denver or local.
Yeah, it's brutal because that's the thing is like a lot of times, like for me, I just watch it on national. Like every game, so Orlando is not in the playoffs, so I just watch every game on national TV, whether it's on NBA
Right.
TV, whether it's TNT, ESPN, ABC, whatever. Um, so like that hasn't been an issue. I would be furious, obviously, if it's a cable dispute because this is what it is. It's just a dispute over streaming rights and it's over money. So
Mhm.
again, it's one of these situations where it's like, yeah, we're here in the playoffs, and it's like Comcast and Altitude Sports, these big corporations can't figure it out, and so of course you're getting screwed if you're a Denver fan. So it's extremely unfortunate. And then it sucks where you can't just watch the national feed. Like that's what else is
Right.
frustrating. What's frustrating about like I get that you want to push people to your local feed and you want to push people to your guys. Like I completely understand that. And I know if I was home, like
Yeah, I'm gonna be you. Sorry, you started crackling up a little bit there, but I kind of agree with you. It's like, dude, like just we had this happen here locally. Um,
Mhm.
During hurricane season. And so the big push on the commercials that we were going for was I don't know if it was the cable company or what side it was, but it was essentially being like, if you want your local hurricane coverage, you have to reach out to this place to like tell them like, hey, let's get this figured out. This dispute. And I'm like, from that angle, it's like that actually is serious information people need to know about. So that's
Yeah.
screwed up that people aren't getting it because of a money situation.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because that, like you said, that's what it is. It's just a money situation, and I get pushing people to your like local. Like, if I was home, for example, if I was
Mhm.
back in Philly, I would 100% be watching Mark Zumoff and be watching
Of course,
Ballin in the
of course.
national or the local feed, just because I'd want that homer element to it. But I mean, the fact that you don't have the option to watch national, then you just totally get ruined out of your game. Like, it's ridiculous, and obviously, I hope that gets fixed here. Because, like we said, this has been a good series. On top of that, like this is not a playoff series you're missing. Just because they lost Jamal Murray doesn't mean you don't want to watch Denver potentially win a playoff series, especially against Portland, given the rivalry that they've had the past couple of
Yeah.
years. Yeah, a disappointing situation. I low key wish I didn't know about that. I would have put them in and fallen maybe as well. They
Right.
could have joined the fans in for there. Get that garbage cable dispute out of there. Thank you everybody for listening to this episode of the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. We appreciate you guys. By the way, I do think that Portland and Denver series is going 7, so we'll see what
Mhm.
happens there. That one truly feels like the most toss up. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We will read them on the podcast. If you're not an Apple user, find us anywhere else you find a podcast: Stitcher, Player FM, Spreaker, Google Play Store, Spotify, Amazon Music, Spreaker. If you're listening to work, going for a run, driving, anywhere you are, we will be there all through the playoffs.
Yes, and follow us on YouTube, Drive and Dish NBA on YouTube, just video versions of the podcast, clips from the show, and more stuff down the line we're hoping to get into. So be sure to give us a follow and join us in the initial 20 club. I think we're in 10, where we have 10 now. So we're
We have
working on the
Yes,
next
we have time.
10. So that works. We'll just go for the next 10. Let's try that.